Hey, what's up folks? This is Keith and you're watching Barber's Auto Help. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to bleed brakes using a helper. Now this process will work whether you're bleeding the brakes at one wheel or at several wheels. However, when you're bleeding the brakes at several wheels, there's sometimes a sequence you have to follow in order to bleed the brakes correctly. And we'll discuss that a little bit more later on, but for now, let's just get directly into the process. Now the first thing you want to do is add fluid to the brake fluid reservoir. You want to make sure that it's topped off almost to the very tippy top. You want to add the correct fluid to the brake fluid reservoir. It should say on the top of your brake fluid cap what type of fluid your vehicle takes. My vehicle takes .3 or .4, so top it off with the correct brake fluid and then just set the cap aside at the time. Leave the cap off. And of course, the wheel or wheels at whatever location or locations you plan on bleeding the brakes at will need to be removed. And in order to do that, you need to jack up and support your vehicle. Information on how to properly do that is not found in this video. Now, I always recommend that you wear some kind of protective gloves. I recommend nitrile gloves, whatever you're not allergic to. You're going to catch me not wearing gloves in this video. That's a big no-no. This stuff is really nasty and can really do a number on your body. Don't get exposed to this stuff. Protect yourself. Now, at this point, what we're going to do is what's called gravity bleeding. We're just going to crack the bleeder screw just enough to where some brake fluid will dribble out. Now it may take some time for the brake fluid to start dribbling out because there may be some air trapped in your caliper or in your line there. Once that air comes out, you'll start to see a steady stream of brake fluid coming out. And this is the reason we left our brake cap off. It helps the brake fluid to flow through the system better. Now once you got a steady stream coming through and you don't see any air bubbles coming through, go ahead and tighten up your bleeder screw.
Now when you're performing the gravity bleed, you want to check the brake fluid level from time to time and add as needed. Do not let the brake fluid reservoir get too low. If it gets too low, you can start to ingest air into the system and that can cause you more work.
Once the gravity bleed is done, go ahead and check and adjust your brake fluid level again. And then once it's topped off, go ahead and install your brake cap, make sure it's good and tight, and we can proceed to do the pressure bleed. Now, while we're doing the pressure bleed, you're going to check the brake fluid level from time to time. You do not want that brake fluid level to get too low to where you start ingesting air into the system. Okay, now we're ready to pressure bleed the brakes at this wheel here. I'm going to have an assistant get in the driver's seat and she's going to pump the brakes for me and I'm going to proceed to bleed the brakes out here at this wheel. I'm going to go ahead and hush up and let you see the process in motion, and then afterwards we're going to go through the process again and I'm going to go step by step and kind of narrate what's going on and what's expected at each step of this process. Pump it.
Pumping. Holding. Floor.
All right, let off.
Okay.
All right, how's that pedal feel?
Pretty good.
Pretty firm?
Yep.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, to start out with, the brake bleeder screw is tight at this point. We're going to have our assistant pump the brakes. She's going to pump it 3 times, and she's going to start pumping it when I tell her to pump it. Pump it.
Pumping.
Once she's done pumping the brakes 3 times, we're going to have her hold pressure on the brake pedal. When she's holding pressure, she's going to say holding.
Holding.
Then I know it's time to crack the bleeder. I'll then crack the bleeder and brake fluid will come out. While brake fluid is coming out, the pedal will drop until it reaches the bottom of its travel. When it reaches the bottom of its travel, my assistant will say floor.
Floor.
That way I know the pedal is all the way down. She's not going to let her foot off of the brake pedal at this point though. Not until I tell her to pump it again. If she does, she could suck air into the bleeder screw and into the caliper and ingest air into the system. I'm going to tighten up the bleeder screw. Then I'm going to say pump it. Pump it. Then she's going to repeat the whole process again. And you just keep doing that until all the air is out of this particular channel in the brake system.
A good indication that you got all the air out of the particular channel that you're bleeding is a nice, steady, solid stream of brake fluid coming out of the brake bleeder. A good indication that all the air is not out of the system or out of the particular channel that you're bleeding is spitting and sputtering. That's an indication that air is still coming out and you still need to repeat the process until you get a solid stream.
Of course, the last time that this process is performed at a particular wheel, after she's done pumping it and you crack the bleeder and the fluid comes out and the pedal goes to the floor and she says floor, you then tighten up the brake bleeder screw to the appropriate torque value. Once the bleeder screw is tightened, you can then check the feel of the brake pedal. When this process is completed, you should have a nice firm brake pedal. Pump the brake pedal a few times and make sure that it doesn't start to fade to the floor, that it's not spongy or soft. You want a nice firm brake pedal. If not, that's an indication that the system may still have air in it and you'll need to continue bleeding the system.
Clean any residual brake fluid from the area. Good old water works great.
Now, if you've done a major repair to the brake system and you didn't just replace like a line at one wheel or a caliper at one wheel, then your brake pedal is probably not going to be firm at this point. In this case, that's when you want to bleed your brakes in the sequence that we discussed earlier. Now, in my experience, for most of the vehicles that I've ever worked on, this sequence is right rear, right front, left front. Now, that means that this process that I just showed you needs to take place at those wheels in that order. Of course, as mentioned, that has been the case on the majority of the vehicles that I have worked on. However, you need to confirm that this is the proper sequence that applies to the vehicle that you're working on.
Now that's the sequence for bleeding the brakes at all four wheels. But say you just replaced a pair of calipers on the front of the vehicle, or a pair of calipers on the rear of the vehicle, or wheel cylinders on the rear of the vehicle. Do you have to bleed all four channels of the brake system in those cases? And most of the time, no. You can just bleed the brakes at those calipers. But you'll want to start by bleeding the caliper furthest away from the brake master cylinder, and then bleed the caliper closest to the brake master cylinder. For instance, if you replaced both your left rear caliper and your right rear caliper, you want to start out by bleeding the right rear caliper first and then the left rear caliper. Similarly, if you replaced the left front caliper and the right front caliper, you want to start out by bleeding the right front caliper and then the left front caliper. For my viewers in Europe, this is probably backwards from what you're used to dealing with. I believe that your brake master cylinder is probably located on the right side of the vehicle instead of the left side of the vehicle. You just want to bleed the brakes on the caliper that is furthest away from the brake master cylinder first, and then gradually get closer to the master cylinder. And I know that this is going to come up, so I'll go ahead and address it right now. Yes, you typically want to do repairs on a brake system in pairs. So whatever you do to one side of the brake system, you want to do the same thing to the other side of the brake system. So if you replace a caliper on the right-hand side, you want to replace the caliper on the left-hand side on that same axle. For instance, if you do a right front, you want to do a left front. You do a right rear, you want to do a left rear. That keeps it even and keeps your brakes wearing and operating evenly. So in most instances, yes, you want to do things in pairs, but that may not be applicable in every instance.
Now, whether you bled your brakes at one wheel or the whole system or part of the system, you need to do a final check and adjustment on your brake fluid. Be sure that you got the correct brake fluid level before you call it done. Now, there are some cases, guys, where even after you do all that, you may still have a spongy or soft brake pedal, and you may still have air in the system. In those cases, you may have air in your brake master cylinder, and you may need to do a bench bleed on your brake master cylinder. And actually, if you just replaced your brake master cylinder before you even did any of this, you wanted to do a bench bleed on the brake master cylinder to begin with, and then do the sequence that I described earlier. This video doesn't go into how to properly bench bleed a brake master cylinder. And still, in some other cases, on vehicles equipped with ABS, it may be necessary to do an ABS service bleed, and that requires the use of a scan tool that actually puts your vehicle into this particular mode here. This is not shown in this video either, but air does get into your HCU, your hydraulic control unit, which is a part of your ABS system, and going into that mode actually actuates the pump and the valves inside that HCU block, and it allows air that might be trapped in there to be released and go through the brake system out the bleeder screws. Well, that is it for this video, guys. Nice simple one for you today. However, as mentioned, this may not apply to every vehicle out there. The particular way to bleed the brakes on your particular vehicle or whatever vehicle you're working on may be vastly different from what I just shown you right here. This, in my experience, fits the majority of the vehicles that I have worked on, and I've been working on vehicles for quite a long time, but there are hybrids out there, there are electric vehicles out there, there are vehicles that are just plain made different that this really doesn't apply to. So in every case, always verify this information in an appropriate repair manual that is fitted to your vehicle that you're working on. Verify everything and make sure you're doing it by the book and doing it correctly. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Please read the entire description down below before you attempt this or apply any of this knowledge. There may be some things I need to clarify, and that's where I do that. Also, please read the disclaimer at the very end of it as well. And please like and subscribe. Thanks again for watching. Have a good one.